In my work in universities around Britain and Europe, we often find people who are particularly antagonistic or hostile to the gospel. And the question is, how do we respond to people like that? How do we respond to people who have really bought into the new atheistic agenda, which doesn't just dismiss Christianity as untrue, but actually hates Christianity for being a kind of moral evil in the world? Well, I think one of the things that we can do is really learn from Jesus. Jesus responds to hostile questioning on many occasions. And one of the things that Jesus does when questioned in a hostile way is always to respond with questions himself. He very rarely gives a straight answer when the question is out to trick him. We see a couple of examples of that. So you remember when Jesus was asked, should we pay taxes to Caesar or not? His response was not to simply answer the question, but to raise another question. He shows them a coin and asks them whose image is on it. Caesar's, they replied. And then he comes out with the response, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. Now, of course, the question they should have asked in response to that is, well, what is God's? If the coin belongs to Caesar, what is God's? And he might have said, well, whose image is on you? But of course, they were just trying to trick him. They didn't really want to know the answer. And then you have that time when they come to Jesus and they say, by what authority are you doing these things? Again, it was a trick question. And Jesus' response is with another question. He references John the Baptist and he says, John's baptism, was it from heaven or was it from men? And they think for a moment and they talk together. And they have a problem. They realise that if they say it was from heaven, people will say, why didn't you believe him? If they say it was from men, they would stone them because they thought John was a prophet. So they come back to Jesus and they say, we don't know. And Jesus' response is very interesting. He says to them, neither will I tell you. Which is interesting because if someone said to you, I don't know, grammatically you can't respond to them by saying, neither will I tell you. It doesn't make sense, does it? But if someone's really saying in their heart, I'm not going to tell you, then of course you can respond to them by saying, neither will I tell you. What Jesus is basically saying is this: you're not stupid enough to answer my trick question, and I'm not stupid enough to answer yours. So we need to be wise. Jesus says, be wise as serpents, innocent as doves. If people are being hostile, sometimes the worst thing to do is to try and answer the question because people don't really want to know the answer. I think it's particularly important sometimes with the hostile questioning we get on issues of sexuality and gender. There is a place and a context to explore those issues, but sometimes when we're being cornered, trying to give an explanation is not going to be helpful. We're just going to be kind of taken out of context and given a soundbite which we wouldn't have necessarily wanted. So I think we need to be careful. We can learn from the model of Jesus, and then we can ask questions back that get people thinking for themselves. I was speaking at an event recently and a guy came up very angry after the event and said, how would you explain the genocide of the Old Testament? What kind of God would allow or command things like that? Now, there is answers to questions like that, but it wasn't an easy answer. There's no soundbite answer. And I was realising that the moment I tried to explain the answer, he would probably come back with 10 more questions. So what I did was I simply turned it around and I said, look, can I ask you a question first? What would you do about the problem of ISIS in the world today? He said, what do you mean? I said, well, look, how would you propose we deal with the evil problem of ISIS? And he said, well, I have no idea. I said, should we just go and wipe them out? Should we start a war? Should we bomb them? What do you think? He said, I have no idea. I said, look, if we struggle to know how to respond to the problem of real evil in the 21st century, maybe we need to understand that the context 3,000 years ago was maybe more complicated than we think. And we need to understand the context before we judge God's response to it. No, actually, he didn't pick up on that, and we talked about other subjects because his issue was not so much an answer to the question, but to try and catch me out on a particular issue. So let's be wise, let's ask questions, and let's think how we can sometimes turn the issue back round. It's also worth remembering that sometimes questions which are hard for us to answer are also hard for the atheist to answer. For instance, the question of suffering. That is a big issue. It's a big issue as a Christian. Why would a God of love allow suffering when he would want to end it if he's a loving God, and he could end it because he's a powerful God? But actually, I'd also want to suggest it's a big problem, actually a bigger problem for the atheist. If there is no God, why care about suffering? Why talk about evil? There is no such thing as objective evil. It just is what happens in the world. There's no such thing as what is objectively wrong. So we can turn that back round. Why are you so worried about the problem of suffering if at the end of the day there's just blind, pitiless indifference, to paraphrase Richard Dawkins? Or to take the idea of a psychological crutch, you just believe in God because you want it to be true. Okay, maybe, but you can always turn it round, can't you? Hang on, it's the reason why you don't believe in God, because you don't want it to be true. So let's think about how we can turn the question round to get the person who you're speaking to think for themselves. Also, it'll mean that they have to do some of the talking as well.